Hi, this is Vijay here. I'm making a video mostly because I'm getting quite a number of pings in game about the build, and most people are asking me whether or not the build is good enough to do certain content. So I figured the best place to actually put up information about this is actually on a video here on the channel. As usual, I'm not going to advertise this or post this on Reddit. I think the number of people on the channel itself is at a decent level to the point where I don't want to grow it further. And I don't want to grow it further because doing so will make it a lot harder for people to get items. So trying to make the builds as what's the term for it? Not as popular, so stuff stays quite stable and you guys are able to invest in it, buy into it, or play the build. Alright, let's go into a couple of details about how this build works. And I mean, I did a few upgrades, so I'll just tell you a few upgrades. But let me just briefly talk about what this build is meant to accomplish and what is the objective of this build. So in 3.24, when I looked at the patch notes, I saw the T17 maps, and I knew immediately that there was a good chance that content might be difficult to the point where you couldn't kill stuff fast enough and you still needed a relatively tanky character, right? And so my hunch was, if that's the case, I'm not really that concerned on building a character that can do like billions of DPS, but it's more important to get a character that can do around 30 to 40 mil, but get a significant amount of tankiness to clear the maps. And I was deciding between this and Necro, and thank God I didn't pick Necro, because now that I look at it on hindsight, Necro is actually really terrible in more ways than one. And one of the reasons why, even if Bama is strong damage wise, the problem I feel ultimately is, even if your character is strong and tanky, and even if you do enough damage, you still run the risk of your AGs dying, your Animate Guardians dying, or your Spectres dying, because of how rippy the map content is. And no doubt that if you've seen a couple of videos recently where people have brought the Bama character into T17s, they've just deleted their AGs, and sometimes their AGs can have like, I don't know, 10 divines worth of gear, which is a bit upsetting. Anyway, so the theory behind it was the Flamewood Totem Chieftain is a great build for this particular league, because one, it does a decent amount of damage on a very low investment. In fact, you could say the investment is pretty much non-existent. You don't really have to invest more than 3 divines for damage alone, and then that gives you the freedom to then gear defenses however you think is appropriate. And in this case, what happened was, by about day 3 or 4, you could just run the Black Zenith gloves, and that alone would just spike your damage so that you could do T16s easily. And the problems I had to solve coming into this build was 2 things: how to deal with tankiness, and next how to deal with clear. So clear was a problem because when I was looking at Jungrun's videos at the time, Wolfield's videos, and Jung actually goes a node called Ancestral Bond. And I noticed after a while that if you run Ancestral Bond, the only thing that can explode is your totems and not you. Which means you can't really pro-lift explodes. Meaning that if you... it kind of cuts out half the interaction. In a sense, I'll give you an example. Let's say you cow an enemy, right? Or let's say the damage is recorded as you. You don't get to proc the explode because you don't do any damage. Or rather, if you do proc the explode does no damage, right? So you can't pro-lift the explodes, and you can't use the explodes to then do other things, right? So that's the reason why I have not gone Ancestral Bond. Ancestral Bond, no doubt, is another multiplier of damage if they hit all your totems. The problem with that is that it hurts your clear significantly if you go Ancestral Bond, so don't click it, don't ever click it. Okay, so this is how I solve clear. Clear is solved by Chieftain explodes into Herald of Ash. So, where's my Herald Ash? It's here, I think. Yeah. So Chieftain explodes pro-lift into Herald of Ash. Herald Ash overkills lead to burns, which can possibly lead to more explodes. You also have another secondary form of pro-lift, which is Legacy of Fury. So when you kill a Scorch enemy, which is nearby you, You have a chance to burn each surrounding enemy for 4 seconds, dealing 8% of the enemy's life as fire damage per second. The kill that you do with this also can proc and explode. So that's the reason why I've kind of like solved the clear this way. Your totem can explode the mob, can kill the mob for you with the initial volley of Flamewood projectiles, and when they die, they do overkill damage or they proc and explode, and then the prolif can also proc explodes, or the explodes can proc more explodes, etc. And then you clear the screen. I found this to be extremely reliable. It is one of the ways I farm Harbingers plus Beyond on T16s and T17s. So I am juicing my T17s at times. If I haven't sold off my T17s, I would just do 1 or 2 of them for fun. And I'll do them with Harby and Beyond Scarabs. Still, we're considerably rippier than T16s, just saying. But T16s themselves are extremely rippy because it is actually rippier than, for example, Rogue Exile farming. So yeah, with this kind of clear, you're able to do like all this content without much trouble or without much difficulty, and clear isn't really an issue. So how did I then solve for tankiness? So because you're running a totem build that relies on the totems to get hit, you essentially have a very delayed sort of damage. It's kind of like EA totems, except your totems don't have range. You have to drop it on the packs themselves, and then you have to wait for the Flamewood to proc. So with that kind of setup, it's actually far more beneficial for you to actually have a tanky character. And the reason for that is simple. Mob aggro is a finicky thing, right? You do have the Chieftain taunt thing, but the best guaranteed way to proc your totems is you're actually standing on them. So a lot of the time in maps when I'm clearing, I'm actually putting the totems ahead of me and dashing into the pack, which will proc the totems because they all start attacking me or the totems on the same location, and then I wipe the entire pack, right? To do that, you kind of need a very tanky character. Now, I can't tell you how to solve for tankiness because there are many ways to solve for tankiness. You could definitely do stuff like path to the left, right side of the tree, get some suppression nodes here, path here and get the suppression nodes here. But I'm generally not in favor of that because I think it uses too many points. There's not many other peripheral nodes that are good for damage, so I wouldn't advise it. My solution to the problem is to stack armor and get Unbreakable. So Unbreakable is a Juggernaut ascendancy, which allows you to apply 8% of your armor to elemental damage shaken, as well as doubling the armor of your chest. There are a lot of things that do grant you armor as well. You have like Ironwood, which gives you 150 armor per summon totem. If you have 4 totems up, that is like 600 increased armor. And then you have also access to Iron Reflexes, which is here, which allows you to then run something like a Lightning Coil. So with the Lightning Coil and Ironwood and Iron Reflexes, you have quite a significant amount of armor. Right now I base at 31k, but with this up, with Warcries up, my Warcries are not up yet, it goes up to about 60, maybe even 70k. You also have stuff like this. So Immortal Flesh is a very cheap belt. You will want to run this anyway because you need Purity of Elements. Purity of Elements is a very safe way of dealing with elemental ailments, but it's also very good. It's also very good for Chieftain for the sole reason that Chieftain double dips on the fire. So the fire res you get because of the Chieftain ascendancy down here. Thessalia modifiers to fire resistance also apply to core lightning res at 50% of their value. So that kind of means that whatever res you get from Purity of Elements, Purity of Fire also go into your core and lightning. This allows you to have a significant amount of resistances over cap, right? This helps you deal with stuff like elemental shred. So like, what was it called again? I need to find the word for it. Sorry, exposure. Yeah, helps you deal with exposure. Helps you deal with enemy curses. Also helps you deal with like ether mods that you pick up from altars. So definitely for sure, you're gonna run elemental Purity Elements, sorry. And with Purity Elements, this is a really strong belt because you can never be ignited, frozen, or shocked with Purity Elements, and that means you get 40% increased armor right off the bat. This also gives you enough health regen, life, and to pretty much like sustain RF. So with this, you can kind of counteract a majority of RF's downsides, and that gives you a pretty significant multiplier. So RF's multiplier is What was it? 43% more spell damage, which is pretty insane. That affects your Flamewood totems as well. So definitely this 3C build is like really essential to help you like sustain RF. Anyway, sustain RF and give you like tankiness, give you life. Mana regen's nice too. Yeah, so let's move on. So now that you know like that, okay, so this is the way I've solved for tankiness. There are also other ways. You can go like for Vow and Divine Flesh. You can go for block if you want. There are block nodes here. You can, I think for Vow, Divine Flesh, and whatever I'm doing right here is probably the best too. You can path Suppression if you want and get rares instead. So instead of a Lightning Coil, you can go for a rare. You can go Cloak of Flame because no Unbreakable. If you don't have Unbreakable, you can just go Cloak of Flame. There are many ways to solve for resistance and tankiness on the left side of the tree, so I'll leave that to you to figure out. But this is the way I've solved it. All right, let's move on. So now that this is an extremely tanky build and a build that does pretty good damage, now is the part where I kind of have to go into detail because I don't think a lot of people know how to play this build. And I say this because if I watch Wolfleo and I watch Jung, I don't think they played the build well as well, but I also think it's because it's how they gear their characters. Wolfleo just went pure damage, and Jung, although he went for a more balanced setup, I don't think 60k EHP is good enough for this build. So let me run into a zone and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Let's go to Ag 10 and Tainted Ravage Square. So how the totems proc, I'll show you. Alright, when the mobs are there, you can summon the totems on them. They hit them and they will proc Flamewood. That's how you get the clear. But when you're dealing with bosses, it's considerably different because the boss is going to be aggroed on you, and sometimes putting the totem next to them and taunting them is not necessarily the best thing you want to do because their basic attacks don't proc the totems well enough. And so what you want, right, for example, let's say if you have a boss that does, let's say, an AoE slam, you can't, okay, let me just refine the statement. When you're dealing with bosses, this build works like a counter puncher. If you have any experience with fighting, you know exactly what I mean. Counter punching is you're going to take advantage of an enemy's attack in order to deal damage, to hit them back. And because this build heavily relies on enemies proccing Flamewood, which is them hitting the totems, your entire objective is not really to sit there and actually like do that, like instantly start doing damage to them, right? Which is what I see most builds will do. They just preload the boss. Their only objectives, I dodge their attacks and I do as much damage as possible. Flamewood Totems is a bit different from that, and it's a bit different for that because majority of your fight is going to be you looking at the boss and seeing what they're going to do. So I'll give you an example. Let's say the boss is let's say the boss has a specific moveset. If you're right next to the boss, if I'm right next to the boss does only like really shitty single target attacks. And it hits for like once every 2 seconds or once every 1.5 seconds. It will be a terrible idea to stand next to the boss. And it will be a terrible idea to stand next to the boss because it cuts your DPS by extremely high amount. They only proc one totem, which means you don't get the multipliers from multiple totems. And they're only hitting it once every 1.5 seconds, which means you can only reset your totems every 1.5 seconds. So if you deal with a boss like that, for example, maybe Searing Exile, what you want to do is move away from the boss and force it to do an attack. And usually the bosses will say something when they're doing a specific attack. Like either so like for example, Exile will say Annihilation and it'll start doing like some Blazing Salvo kind of attack. When it does that sort of attack, what I do is I stand there, I don't move, and I spam totems on myself. Right. The reason why I'm doing that is 1, I'm tanky enough to take it. That's why being tanky is important. 2, by doing this and summoning totems continuously, it's basically proccing the totems many times. And you'll see a shit ton of projectiles fly from your totems. The second thing is, the totems also give you some form of defensiveness, right? Totems give you 150 armor per summon totem. It also gives you 5% of damage from hits is taken from the nearest totem's life before you. So with that, you are pretty tanky and you're able to like survive if you have a decent amount of EHP. Okay, so I'll give you an example as well. Let's say you're dealing with Shaper. Most times you have to avoid your Shaper slams. In this case, what I would advise is when you see a Shaper slam coming, ask yourself, can I tank it? If the answer is yes, you're not going to move. You're going to stand there and drop 4 totems. You don't need to do more than 4 because Shaper does not proc does not hit more than once, correct? If the Shaper is only going to do 1 slam, it's not going to hit more than once. You want all 4 totems to proc. So you just do this once. Okay, let's say an enemy is doing a damage over time, Shaper Beam. What do? You get the fuck out of there because they're not going to hit your totems. It's damage over time. So a lot of what you do in a boss fight, what you do in a single target situation is heavily dependent on what you know about the boss. You better know the boss mechanics, you better know what the boss does, and you better know what you should respond with when fighting those bosses. Sounds good? Alright. So that out of the way, that's how you kind of deal damage with this build. You must play in that specific way. Okay, I'll give you another example. Let's say the boss has a ranged projectile attack. Let's say Abomination map, T17, Chevrons. What can you do? So, you stand between you and the boss and put totems in front of you. Why? 1, your totems actually block her range attacks. Their range attacks don't penetrate your totems. So, you're going to basically avoid damage. Second, her hitting your totems when they're clustered like that means she's going to proc all 4 of your totems with every projectile. So that's how you do damage to Chevron on T17s. I can give you a lot more examples because there's so many different bosses, but ultimately at the end of the day, you need to figure out what the bosses do in order to do damage with this build. You can't be lazy with this build, unfortunately. Okay, what's the upside to this? The upside to this is you have a pretty insane character for the investment. So when I was able to do T16, juice T16s, this build was less than 30 divines. In fact, it was less than 20 divines. And right now with the build at 50 divines, I can pretty much do juice T17s. It is an extremely cheap build because the totems don't really need much. As I said many times, the totems don't really need much to do damage, and you can just fully spec for defenses. Alright, I think the last thing I need to cover is for those that have already been playing this build and they're already pushing it to the end game, you want to know what else you can invest in to make a stronger character. This is for you, alright? For the rest, you can kind of tune this out. 2 major changes. There was a Reddit post about Warcry uptime and minimum Warcries, and I thought that was a really interesting tech, and I tried to figure out if I could fit it in here, and I managed to do so. So what I have here is a cluster jewel for both the warning call and the lead by example. So that means I have permanent uptime of onslaught. Actually, where is my Warcry? Oh yeah, sorry, I didn't. It means I have permanent uptime of onslaught, and also means I have permanent uptime on the buff for warning call. Yep. So 100% increased armor, and then 20% move speed, attack speed, and spell cast speed. Really nice. Enduring Cry is now on a really low cooldown, if I can show you here. Enduring Cry has a 2.83 second cooldown, which means every 2.83 seconds I regenerate 2k life. And I have a permanent buff of 2 additional physical damage reduction per endurance charge. If I have 4 endurance charges, that is 24% additional physical damage reduction. It also gives me elemental res. Less important, but still pretty good. Alright. The other upgrade is I went for Ashes of the Stars. And the reason why Ashes of the Stars is better than a Dragon's Fang is because once you can sustain the reservations through Charisma, it's the same amount of damage for Rejuvenation Totem, because instead of getting 3 levels, you get 30% more totem life. So it's about the same in terms of damage and totem life. But the main reason why you get Ashes of the Stars is it gives quality on everything else as well, not just your Flamewood. So for example, you get levels on Banner, you get levels on Molten Shell, you get quality on Molten Shell, you get levels on Call to Arms. You also get quality on Call to Arms, by the way, because it's a spell, right? The spell skill. Enduring Cry also gets quality and levels. Righteous Fire gets quality and levels. If you see Righteous Fire AoE, this is pretty massive, right? Because the base Righteous Fire quality is so high. You get levels and quality on everything. Flammability, Wave of Conviction, Arcanist Brand, all your auras, Herald of Ash, and Frostbling. That's kind of the reason why I've gone for sorry, Ashes of the Stars. Keep forgetting. I was about to call it Omni. Alright, that's the reason why I've got Ashes of the Stars. Now, I know you can't afford. You may not be able to afford this. Ashes of the Stars is actually kind of cheap this league. I bought this for 10 divines. It's, I think previous leagues they were like for 30% they were like more than 20 or 30 divines. So this particular league, because it was relatively inaccessible, it was off the radar for most people, and right now you can probably get this for 10. But even if you can't afford this, as I said, Dragonfang's Flight still pretty good, and I'm pretty sure it's like less than a divine right now for a Dragonfang's Flight with 3 rejuvenation totem. Alright, that's all the upgrades I've done for this build. There's not much else. I think maybe I didn't talk about this earlier, but I also got a +1 endurance charge on the Legacy of Fury. This means I have 4 endurance charges up at all times. If I ever do level to 100, I will probably add 1 more to endurance charge here and have 5 total endurance charges. But yeah, other than that, not much else. Alright, hope you enjoyed this video. Probably will start thinking about the next build I want to play. I mean, I've been thinking about it for almost like 3 days at this point, but I've POB'd everything. I'm not happy with like all the different alternatives. I looked at Archmage, I looked at Minions, and I find that in general, when it comes to T17 maps, there are not many builds that can do them effectively. So it feels kind of bad, because if Chieftain Totems can do that on 50 divs, under 50 divs, you know, every other build will like probably take like 200 divs, 100 divs to do them effectively. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll play Pathfinder, do a junk build, because I'm pretty sure that slaps. But I don't know. We'll see. Alright, see you guys. Peace. I'm out. Bye.